Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving straight into the source material from day 3 of the ongoing trial of Sean Diddy Combs.
Yeah, and our source today is an ABC News YouTube transcript. It really focuses on the testimony from Cassie Ventura, Combs' former girlfriend, obviously a key witness, plus some analysis from legal experts.
Right, and our mission here, is to cut through the headlines. We want to unpack the most significant details from the stand, understand how the prosecution is trying to link them to these federal charges, racketeering, sex trafficking.
Serious charges.
Very serious. And also explore how the defense is pushing back and maybe touch on some related things people are searching for around this case.
It's really about getting past the surface level, understanding the core legal arguments unfolding.
Okay, so let's get into it. Day 3. Cassie Ventura back on the stand. Second day of testimony, and it was reportedly very explicit, very difficult to hear about her nearly 11-year relationship with Combs.
Well, what stands out immediately from what the source highlights is her description of being made to participate in, I think she said hundreds, of these freak-offs.
Freak-offs, yeah.
Yeah.
She characterized them as these sort of sexual performances, often involving male prostitutes.
Yes, that's how she described them. And here's where it gets, well, really crucial for the legal case. She testified that Combs didn't just, set them up.
He recorded them.
He allegedly recorded them, setting up video equipment, and she testified she felt these recordings were then used essentially as blackmail against her. Leverage.
Wow. Okay. And then there were the specific alleged violent incidents too, right?
Exactly. The source details that 2016 hotel incident, the one where the video later surfaced. She described Combs allegedly beating her as she tried to leave a freak-off that had turned violent.
And the prosecution showed images of damage from a vase or something.
Allegedly, yes. Images they claim show damage from a vase he threw at her during that specific attack.
And she also testified about an alleged rape in 2018.
That's right, in her apartment. Her testimony, as reported, described it as quick, saying his eyes went black, that she told him no.
But didn't know if he heard her.
Didn't know if he heard her before he left. That's what was reported from her testimony.
And it wasn't just physical, was it? She talked about the psychological impact.
Oh, absolutely. Immense psychological toll. She stated the relationship left her drug addicted, psychologically damaged, needing trauma therapy, experiencing PTSD episodes.
Even suicidal thoughts by the end.
Yes. It sounds like she was in a very dark place. And she even mentioned, interestingly, writing things down like chapters for a book she wanted him to read to understand the pain.
Like a desperate attempt to communicate the damage.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And then there was the reveal on the stand, new information for the jury that she'd previously sued Combs.
And settled.
For how much? Settled that lawsuit, reportedly, for $20 million. That's definitely important context for the jury as they weigh her testimony now.
Okay, so you have all this incredibly harrowing testimony. What does it actually mean for the federal charges? The racketeering, the sex trafficking by force, fraud, coercion, transportation. How does the prosecution connect those dots for the jury?
Well, that's exactly their challenge, right? Their strategy, according to the analysts in our source, is to take these specific, often graphic details.
And weave them into a pattern.
Precisely. A pattern of systematic abuse and, crucially, coercive control. That's the legal concept they need to establish, showing this pattern wasn't just random abuse, but designed to overcome her will, make her unable to leave or say no.
So that's the coercion part of the charge. How does racketeering fit in?
Right. So racketeering basically involves a conspiracy, 2 or more people committing criminal acts for a criminal enterprise. The prosecution argues the alleged freak-offs, the alleged rape, the video taking, the threats using those videos, or violence. Those are the criminal acts.
And the enterprise.
Yeah.
Is that just Combs and Cassie or broader?
Broader. That's where the alleged hiring of others comes in escorts, dancers, reportedly from different states. Vegas, LA, Miami, New York. One analyst mentioned 13 different individuals.
Okay, so moving people across state lines for these alleged activities.
That's the federal hook. That movement, participating in events domestically and even internationally, is what allows the federal government to charge things like sex trafficking and transportation for prostitution rather than just state-level assault or domestic violence.
Makes sense. And I heard they're also using testimony about him being violent towards other people. Like staff.
Yes, that's another layer. By having Cassie testify about seeing him allegedly inflict violence on others' assistants, staff, they're trying to bolster the argument that this wasn't just about their relationship, but a broader pattern of behavior indicative of a criminal enterprise. Control through fear, essentially.
It kind of reminds me, and one analyst mentioned this, of the R. Kelly trial in some ways.
There are parallels, definitely. High-profile defendant, coercive control allegations, using abuse. But there's a key difference highlighted in the source.
The age of the victims.
Exactly. R. Kelly involved minors, mostly. Here, the alleged victims are adults. That makes it potentially harder for the prosecution to convince a jury that a successful adult woman, like Cassie, could be controlled so completely for so long.
So how do they address that challenge?
Well, the expectation is they'll bring in expert testimony. Our source suggests they'll discuss concepts similar to battered woman syndrome.
Which isn't a diagnosis, right? But more a legal concept.
Right. It's a framework used in court to help explain the psychology, why someone might stay in an abusive relationship, the complex dependencies, the difficulty in leaving, how long it can take to even recognize oneself as a victim and feel safe enough to act.
And those really graphic details she shared about alleged acts during her period or with a UTI, the prosecution's using those strategically.
Very strategically, it seems. The goal there is likely to, frankly, shock the conscience of the jury, to argue that no one would willingly consent to that kind of degradation.
Implying coercion must have been involved.
Exactly. They use those details as evidence suggesting her will was overcome, which is critical for proving trafficking and coercion, not just abuse.
Okay, so that lays out the prosecution's case pretty clearly. How's the defense countering this? It seems like they have a mountain to climb.
They absolutely do, but their strategy, as described in the source, is quite specific. They're trying to draw a very clear line in the sand between domestic violence and the federal charges of sex trafficking or racketeering.
So they're not denying everything.
No, and this might be surprising. They are apparently conceding that Sean Combs may have done, quote, indefensible things. They admit there was violence, domestic abuse. They're not contesting the injuries shown in photos.
They're saying, yes, abuse happened.
But, and this is the core of their argument, it stemmed from issues within a volatile personal relationship. Things like jealousy, infidelity, money problems.
Not part of a criminal enterprise.
Exactly. They're arguing it wasn't part of a structured criminal operation aimed at trafficking. Take the 2016 hotel incident again.
Right, the one with the video.
The prosecution frames it as violence related to the alleged enterprise. The defense argues, no, he was just trying to get his cell phone back during a really ugly domestic dispute. They're trying to disconnect the violence from the trafficking narrative.
So they'll argue her decisions, like traveling with him or participating in those freak-offs.
Were choices made within the context of that complicated abusive relationship? Maybe out of love, dependency, fear, but not solely because she was being trafficked under his control for that purpose.
They're trying to keep it contained within the definition of domestic violence.
Precisely. Acknowledge the horrific abuse, but argue it doesn't legally meet the definition of the federal crimes charged. So those same graphic details the prosecution uses to show coercion.
The defense uses them to show the severity of the domestic abuse.
Exactly. To say, look how bad the domestic abuse was, but arguing it doesn't automatically equal trafficking?
That's a fine line to walk.
It is. And one analyst noted, as of day 3, the prosecution might have made a strong case for domestic violence, but proving racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking beyond a reasonable doubt, that's still a high bar. The defense is banking on the jury seeing that distinction.
And what about the atmosphere in the courtroom? The source mentioned reactions.
Yeah, reportedly quite palpable. Jurors were described as quite moved by Cassie's testimony, showing reactions like, moving their necks, raising eyebrows, shaking heads, especially when shown those explicit images from the alleged freak-off videos.
And Combs himself.
Reportedly grabbed a binder to look through the images himself during that part.
Wow. And the family dynamics must be intense.
Seems so. Fewer members of Combs' family, especially his daughters, were apparently present for the most graphic parts of Cassie's testimony. Understandably, perhaps just too much to hear.
But Cassie's husband was there? Alex Fine.
Consistently, yes. The source described him at one point appearing to glare at Combs during some explicit testimony, but mostly just focused entirely on his wife, sort of, providing silent support.
It really paints a picture of the human drama unfolding. Now, outside the core trial, people are apparently searching for related info online, like about Kid Cudi.
Right. There's curiosity about Cassie's brief relationship with Kid Cudi back in 2011, when she and Combs were apparently on bad terms.
And the prosecution is linking this to the case.
Yes, because Combs allegedly found out, got enraged, and supposedly threatened to blow up his car, wanting Kid Cudi's friends to watch. That alleged threat.
They're trying to tie it to the racketeering conspiracy. As an act of arson.
Potentially, yes, as one of the predicate acts for the racketeering charge. Though Combs' lawyers strongly deny he had anything to do with any actual car bombing incident, it's the alleged threat that's being used.
And people are also searching for Alex Fine, her husband.
Yeah, who is he? He's described as a celebrity personal trainer, former college football player, met Cassie in a gym in 2018. Apparently, he trained Combs first, then Cassie.
And things moved quickly from there.
Very quickly, it seems. Relationship developed, engagement, marriage, baby all by 2019. People are likely interested in that timeline, her moving on from Combs and building a new life.
Makes sense. What about the Suge Knight connection people are searching? How does he fit in?
Well, Suge Knight, co-founder of Death Row Records, currently in prison. The connection isn't direct to these charges, really. It's more historical context.
Bad Boy versus Death Row.
Exactly. Competing hip-hop moguls, Combs and Knight, the whole East Coast-West Coast rivalry, Tupac, Biggie. It places Combs in that history of powerful, sometimes controversial figures in the industry. Maybe relevant context for the idea of an enterprise, but not directly tied to the specific allegations from Cassie in the way the source presents it.
Got it. And finally, Cassie's parents. People are curious about them.
Yeah, just basic background info seems to be the interest. The source mentions her mom was an Army brat, dad a Navy brat. She's from Connecticut. Her mom appeared in an Instagram photo when Cassie announced her relationship with Alex Fine.
And her mom came up in court testimony.
Briefly mentioned, yeah, in relation to Cassie apparently struggling to be truthful with her mom about what was really going on in the relationship with Combs. Just adds another layer to the personal story behind the headlines.
So, wrapping this up, this deep dive into day 3 really shows the raw intensity of the testimony, but also these two clashing legal narratives.
Absolutely. The prosecution meticulously building this case for a federal criminal enterprise, using horrific details to argue coercion.
While the defense fights tooth and nail to frame it all as severe domestic violence, terrible, yes, but not racketeering or trafficking under the law.
It really underscores how the same set of alleged facts can be interpreted so differently through a legal lens.
And considering these complexities, proving that level of coercive control over an adult for years, proving an enterprise beyond just a relationship.
Yeah, it's a tough legal standard.
It really makes you think, what's the challenge for a juror here?
Yeah.
How do you distinguish between testimony describing horrific, long-term domestic abuse and testimony that meets the specific legal requirements for federal charges like sex trafficking and racketeering? That distinction is everything in this trial.